Good morning. Welcome back to Day to Day. It's Greg Michaelson here with my new friend, Chris Nyhuis. Am I saying that right?
You are saying it perfectly. Thanks, Greg.
Nice. Chris is the CEO at Vigilant. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? How'd
All
you
right.
get started in this space?
Yeah, so I've been in IT. You can't say cyber for 30 years because the cyber industry hasn't been around that long, but but it's sort of. But IT grew out of or cyber grew out of IT operations, and I've been in that for over 30 years. I have a deep background in SCADA systems, and had a lot of my career was in automotive prior to Vigilant, and for the last 16 years been the CEO of Vigilant, hold multiple patents in cybersecurity and infrastructure, uh, and a new provisional patent on AI. So pretty excited about that. And then on top of that, for me, a big passion of mine, I'm a pilot. I like to fly aircraft, climb mountains, and a human trafficking investigator. So we do some work from the Vigilant side, working in orphan care and anti-human trafficking.
Wow. There's a lot there, a lot to unpack.
Yeah. I like to be busy. And I'm a father and a husband. I've been married for 25 years and have, three amazing kids and just yeah, working through life.
Amazing. Well, you said the auto industry. What does that have? How does that relate to the cybersecurity stuff?
Yeah, so I originally started in industrial control systems, SCADA. I was working for
What is
a
data? I don't know that word.
it's basically it's IoT, OT, just infrastructure. And the thing with what I was doing back then, industrial control systems, and so the organization I was working for was a frozen food warehouse, and they built and they built and maintained and managed frozen food warehouses around the country, and inside those systems are ammonia control systems. And so we had to manage those, from an operations standpoint, but also from a cyber standpoint. Who would want to try to take this thing over, and why would they want to? Uh, you know, the reason they would want to is you can open up systems and release ammonia and melt people's lungs. So it's not a good thing. Well, that transitioned from that company into another organization that warehoused big data for the automotive industry. So we would pull information out of dealer management systems on a daily basis, and it was this was early 2000s. Just big data, and um, we had to secure that, make sure that this purchasing information didn't get stolen and distributed out all over the place. And we supported the major OEMs, and so it's pretty interesting ride.
Okay. Okay. So keeping data encrypted and secure and all that sort of thing.
Exactly right. Yeah, yeah. So where in the frozen food world, it was like, well, how do we secure these systems so that someone can't take them over? How do we make sure that even from a food supply chain standpoint, if you take down the shipping dock, right? You got a frozen food warehouse, you've got, you know, at any given time, 100 trucks full of frozen food that are could become perishable right on the tarmac if you can't receive them in. You have industrial control systems that someone could take over and create mass casualty events. On the automotive side, it was around data privacy and data protection. Even before a lot of data privacy and protection even existed, it was around. I'll say this: compliance, isn't meant to actually secure things. It's meant to control the people that manage data, so that way they do a baseline of protection on these things. And so back then, before those systems existed, it was, well, how do we keep people from doing mass casualty events? And with the data, it's, well, how do we keep people from just taking advantage of our clients, right? And that was the guiding light.
Hmm. The mass casualty thing is crazy. From where I sit in my day to day, that none of that ever crosses my mind. Like that's not a
Yeah,
thing
yeah.
that could possibly happen. But it
Mhm.
sounds like the way you're talking about it, that it's kind of a constant threat
Oh,
in
it's
lots.
huge. It's
Really?
huge. Yeah, it's huge. I mean, even, like back in March, even of this year, there was a major supply chain attack that started in a very, very small place. But basically, in this case, a threat actor group, which eventually got attributed to a North Korean group, um, went after small uh, open source technology platforms that gave them access to tokens and authentication, passwords, things like that, uh, to developers and maintainers of other projects like Python and OpenSSL and all those things. And what they were trying to do was work their way up this attack chain from project to project to project to get wider and wider distribution of malware. And when you look at downstream to a lot of these projects, what runs on JavaScript? Everything, right? And they actually went after JavaScript. They went after Axios. They were able to distribute remote access Trojans to 250 million systems within an hour. And so we saw this really early on, like in March, and we were around the clock, 18, 20-hour days, just tracking what was going on. We built some software immediately to stop it from taking place. And we were able to work with a lot of these open source code repositories to fix their software. But the thing about it is whenever these attacks happen, we're so trained to want an answer of why they did it, that a lot of times we take the most obvious answer, right? Kind of that, Occam's razor type approach, right? And what's interesting is Occam's razor can be used against you as a tool by a hacker that's intelligent. And so sometimes they will create the most obvious approach, right? And that's where I believe ransomware really takes place, right? Like ransomware is really in a lot of cases today a diversion tactic. But to tie a bow on this is that attackers will create that obvious reason why they're there, but in reality they have a much deeper reason. And like in this case with the supply chain attack, we believe they were after FedRAMP data centers, and we believe GovCloud stuff, and we believe they were after power, light, and water, right? And if you're going in, why would someone attack a power system, or why would someone attack a provider of cardio or of heart monitors, right? Why would they do that?
Because they're
Because
evil? I don't know.
because they're evil, right? Because like one of the companies that went down in the same time, this was an Iranian group. They took down an organization, Stryker, that does telemetry data for ambulances and people out in the war effort, and just even ambulances here. So for about a 2-day period, a lot of ambulances couldn't send telemetry data back to a hospital. And so
Where they were located.
yeah, where they were located. And so, that was here in the US. And so, when you think about it, it's like, well, what's the end game? Instead of like, what's the obvious thing in front of me? What's the end game for this attack? And, if you're attacking an ammonia control system, your end game isn't to raise the temperature in the freezer, right? So
Hmm. So how so they target in this particular example you're talking about, they're targeting open source uh, uh, software libraries that had vulnerabilities that would allow them to kind of distribute malware to the
mhm.
various people that use those.
Exactly. Yeah. What they had done was they had, if you look back at, the way this played out. So March 12th of this year, there's this software repository called TJ Actions, and what they were really doing is, around, and I have we did a ton of research on this. It's up on our website, vigilantdefense.com. If you go to our research area, you can read up on it. But what they basically did was they took advantage of a deployment mechanism in GitHub, right? And so GitHub was secure. All of these applications and technologies, all of them were secure the whole time. What the attackers realized is that around 2004-ish, a lot of maintainers of software started to deploy a tool called GitHub Actions. And what GitHub Actions does is once you deploy software, it goes through all this process, CI/CD, to make sure that the software's good, it's correct, it's passed all the tests, and it gets delivered. Because it's really difficult when you're managing an open source technology for free, right? It's not your day job, to have the time to do some of these minuscule tasks in deployment. Well, that whole process, took place in a sense where you would take a version of software and you would pin it in the code to a specific version of another piece of software. So if you look at open source technology, it's like this upside down pyramid where you have like a few pieces of software down here. And then as people use those pieces of software, it all kind of goes back down, right? And up. And what these attackers realized is that people had taken these actions, and instead of pinning it to a specific version, they said anything above this version. And so what the attacker did was they came in a lot of cases, they put code in the white space between the existing code. It's called stenography. And they deployed that code out. And because of all the automatic updates, everything out there that was dependent on those projects got immediate updates. And what the code they did was they embedded was meant to steal any open API tokens or passwords that were sitting on someone's laptop, and they got it.
Wow. So, and that that issue was created in 2004. It's just been sitting out there, that vulnerability.
Yeah, it's been around for a really long time. Yeah, I mean, someone could, and more than likely, someone has taken advantage of it. When we started investigating it, we actually went back and saw that last July, because what we did was we created a tool called Runner Guard, and we used that. We open sourced it, but we took that tool and we used it to scan the top 50,000 repositories on GitHub. What we found is 40% of them were vulnerable to this attack of the top 50,000 projects, which is massive. And then inside of that, we looked for, we then created the ability to like detect if a project had been compromised. And we found projects in the top 50,000 that were compromised back to July of 2024. And if we went even deeper, I'm sure we'd find more even earlier. But one project we found was this password manager piece of software that basically dumped all the keys. Like it was crazy.
That is crazy. Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
How many compromised projects did you find?
A lot, actually. So there were, of the I don't want to disclose the exact number, but it was a lot. Yeah, because the thing is it's Intel, right? But I'll say that there were
More than 50.
yeah, there were more than 50. Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
That's significant.
Yeah, and they were important projects. Like that's the thing is when you can be smart about it, like they were, and they went after a piece of software, like they went after a security product called Trivy, and they compromised that piece of software, and that one gave them access because it's a security scanner, gave them access to everything that Trivia had access to. Light LLM, they went after JavaScript. JavaScript got compromised, and so when JavaScript got compromised, like I said, 250 million systems had remote access Trojans delivered to them, right? So, when you can compromise the code, right, at the base of technology you use, then bam,
And all of it was this North Korean group? Or can you
Uh,
tell who it is?
yeah,
It's
that's the thing with attribution. People attribute it to them. I rarely believe that threat actor groups work in a silo. And a lot of it started taking place around the time that we went into Iran. So my feelings on it is that there had to be some collaboration between Iran and North Korea. But at the end of the day, I'll say this: it is important to understand who's attacking, for sure. But in our world, you can, any attacker can attack in a way that makes it look like another country did it or another person. And I think a lot of people, it's back to that Occam's razor. A lot of people want to pick someone to blame, and the fact of the matter is attackers will create Easter eggs for you to think as a diversion to think to make you think there's someone else. And so my concern usually is, how do we defend? How do we see what they're doing? What are the tactics and things that they're trying to play out? But to that point, the belief is that it's primarily North Korea, But I do believe that there was collusion from, China and collusion from Iran. Yeah, can't prove that, but, just looking at the threat landscape, there more than likely was. So,
So there's no actual way to tell unequivocally who did what in this case.
not
Is
really, not really. And I would say this in almost every attack, there isn't, because you don't know what
but you know
has
where this
been
stuff is being
falsified or
sent?
not. You do, but even if you track back to an IP address in North Korea, someone can take over a system in North Korea and then bounce back. Even with like, a lot of people will geo block in their firewalls. Well, once an attacker knows you're geo blocking their country, they just compromise some person's laptop in Iowa, right, or their desktop or a server somewhere, and then they bounce through there. And it's like, well, is it someone's grandma in Iowa attacking you? No, it's just her laptop's taken over. So that's where I think it's really important for people to do as much research as you can to try to understand it. Now, in this case, the threat actor group did come out and say, "Hey, we did it." But even with that, you know, that also could be a diversion.
And so let's talk about Vigilant a little bit.
Yeah,
You said you started it 16 years ago.
16 years ago. Yeah. So
Tell me the creation story.
yeah, so I was working at that organization that was in the automotive industry, big data. And, I was seeing different types of attacks that were coming in, and they were not getting stopped by our firewalls. They were not getting the vulnerabilities they were using were not getting stopped by the vulnerability assessments. We didn't see them in our vulnerability assessments. The first time we saw those types of attacks were when the attacker was actually attacking. We didn't our antivirus didn't stop it, you know, and so we're looking and we're going, okay, what the heck? And the what did stop it was us looking, right? We were looking at logs, we were looking at things. There was, technology snort had come out, so we were using that. We were looking at using different platforms to really pull data and just put them together. And so I started reaching out to my peers in the industry, and I'm like, hey guys, this is happening. Let's talk about it. And there was adversity there. They didn't want to talk about their vulnerabilities. They want to hear mine because we were competitors, but they didn't
Yeah.
want to talk about theirs. And at that point I realized, I said, to myself, I was like, there's no way that I'll be able to make a difference on that side of the desk, right? Because there's always going to be this view that we're promoting our company, or we're trying to get information or intel on our competitors, but the threat was real. And so I decided to jump out and start Vigilant. And the premise of Vigilant was, and still is to do everything, to do things no one else is doing, right, to find these threats. Because if you look at our industry, most of our industry builds technology and responds based on trends, right? And whenever something is trending, if and you do it, you're never the first person. And if it's trending enough, you're probably in the last stage of that trend, right? And when you're dealing with cyber threats, that's not a good place to be, right? And so for us, we said, well, what are people not doing? Why are firewalls not working? What is the rest of the industry doing? And what we saw is that the rest of the industry, or the industry in general, was starting to move towards a direction. Are you familiar with the OSI stack?
No.
Okay, so basically, in technology, there are all these levels of communication that were created so that different software manufacturers could focus on just making a network card or just focus on making an application. And there were these rules that were set between each level so that way, if you did design as a network card, you would have to have what's coming in and out follow a certain requirement so you could interact and technology could scale, right? It wasn't proprietary. And in cybersecurity, um, the lower you go, the more data, or the easier it is to find a threat actor. The higher you go, the harder it is. Now, conversely, cybersecurity is more expensive, lower in that stack to do. There's more data, there's more analysis, there's more work to do. The higher you go, there's less work. And so what the industry really has done over the last, 18 years, is they've gone higher in the stack because it's less expensive. Now it's also less effective. And that's why you see, like, when we started Vigilant, the average time to detect a threat was 90 days. The average time to detect now is 287 days
Okay.
for the industry. Now at
Well,
Vigilant, we've been able to take that 90 days and bring it down to 4 hours.
now wait, how tell me more about that. So, the time to detect a threat. So,
Yeah.
somebody hacks you or
Hmm.
some malware is planted in your system, it takes almost a year on
Almost a year.
average to
On
find it?
average. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that means there's no good systems for looking for it, I guess,
Well, I would say,
or
I mean,
nobody's
yeah, I mean, we've taken that 90 days from when we started and reduced it to 4 hours, right? So there is the right systems, there is the right way to do it, there's the right strategy, but most of what you buy in the cyber industry today has gone the opposite direction, right? It went up stack, and because of that, you know, that's increased that time to detect. Now it's even worse because in most of those cases, it's not the detection systems that actually found the threat actor. It's the threat actor revealing themselves. Like, hey, we just took you down ransomware wise, right? So it's not that these systems are even more effective. I think it would even be even longer if these threat actors on average waited longer to reveal themselves. But once they're detected, it can take another 60 days to remediate. So you're looking at over a year from the time a threat actor first started doing something. And so, now a lot of vendors out there will say that they respond in 15 minutes, right? Or they have a 15-minute SLA. What they mean is from the time of detection, right? Which is almost a year too late. Yeah.
Now you said that your average is 4 hours with
4
Vigilant?
hours. Yeah.
And Vigilant is a software platform that it gets installed somewhere or
Yeah.
what's
Yeah, so we've developed early on. We developed technology to be able to collect all this information. We at our core, we're really a data company. Like we're looking at, okay, well, cyber's based on big data. How do you deal efficiently with big data and find the needle in the haystacks really, really quickly? So we've developed a lot of technology through the years to do that. Now we went into the market with that technology and brought SOC as a service on top of it because a lot of companies, especially back 16 years ago, they didn't have IT teams, right? And if they did, and even at the enterprise level, they were spread really thin. So we brought both our technology and our um, and our in our SOC as a service. Now, as the industry changed, uh, we have continued to develop those products, and now companies are saying, hey, we would like to have our own SOC, right? So you see a lot of companies building their own SOCs now, and they're like, "Hey,
what
can we
is a
use your
stock?
technology?" So it's a security operations center. So it's a group
Oh,
of
I see.
people. Yeah, it's a group of people that sit on a console looking at the data that's coming through and trying to find threat actors. Um, when you look at and I would even say this, not all SOCs are created equal. There are some SOCs that are US based only, and there are some SOCs that use foreign nationals. That's coming under a lot of scrutiny now because there's been a lot of attacks that have come through external SOC teams. That are not I would say friendly to the United States. Um, and so you take these SOC teams now for Vigilant. Now we've been poised to do this all along, is that now we're taking our technology, putting it into organizations, giving them the same 4 hour capability on their SOC teams, and then we're wrapping our SOC around them as more like a tier 3.
Now, why is it 4 hours and not like 4 seconds? 4 hours seems to imply that you need a person looking at stuff and like if a computer was doing it, it would happen practically instantly. Yeah.
Right,
What?
it would, and
4 hours.
now to juxtapose that, it's 4 hours opposed to the industry's 287 days, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
No, no,
yeah,
no. I'm
yeah,
not knocking the 4
yeah,
hours.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And
But the
what's the load of work here
yeah,
that's
yeah.
happening in those 4 hours? Is it like
It's validation, like even with AI, and I mean, there's been companies doing AI cybersecurity for a decade, right? This isn't brand new. the problem with AI on the defensive side, now offensively, AI is amazing because you can take AI and you have this thing on your side, which is called time, because AI has to learn. So an attacker can take as much time as they want to learn as much information, to train their models as much as possible. They can even take antivirus, buy those systems, install thousands of them out in the cloud, and then point their attack AI at it to manipulate and train those systems, the AI model on the defensive side, to not detect them, right? So there's all these things that attackers have in their tool set. And so when you take AI detection systems that have been trained by the attacker, right? Because if they go train those endpoints, they're out on the cloud, and they learn to not detect the attacker will know, and then that intelligence and detection gets pushed down to everybody's laptops, and now the attacker knows I can go and now attack without being detected. And once they start attacking, now someone else's detection system has to have time to learn what that attacker was doing and then respond to it, right? And whereas the defensive system has to do it in real time, where an attacker can take as much time as they want before they attack, right? So
Sure.
that what happens in that 4 hour window is, we're collecting the information. We're running it through things we already know, trying to get the easy stuff out, right? Are there detections we've seen? Are there tactics we've seen that just, blip on the screen? But the other part of that is we have systems that take that rotate through what we call an OODA loop. So OODA loop's not something we created, but it's we observe the data, decide what to do with it, and then we observe, detect, decide, and then act. And that cycle has to take place with not just technology in it, but also human interaction, so that a human can go, hey, is this real or not? And so with our clients, we have a zero false positive guarantee, which means we're not going to give a client information that's false. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't reach out to them and say, hey, we've seen something, we need more information on it. But for cyber, you have to be right when you have to be right, right? And right will mean that you're proving something didn't happen, but it also mean that you're proving that something did, right? And
So
so in that
zero
4 hours,
false.
we're doing that.
That means you'll never say this is an attack when it's not an attack.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. When we declare it's an attack, we've got forensic evidence to show it. We're defining it, we're remediating it. So in that 4 hour period of time, we're not just detecting the threat, we're not just analyzing it, we're also responding to that threat too. So
But forcing your false positive rate to zero is going to increase your false negative rate. Yeah.
it can, but that's where and I'll say, like, we don't get, our team doesn't have. I'm not saying that we don't have false positives on our side.
Sure, sure, sure.
Our we don't declare incidents to clients, right?
Gotcha.
If they're not, and that's a really important key, because once you declare an incident at your company, right? If you have cyber insurance, you are required to report that. If you're in a highly compliant state, you're required to report that. So it's really important that when you're declaring incidents within your organization, that you've got a forensic capability to show that it did or didn't happen before you declare that.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So what is the frequency of these events? Like, if I'm a big company, am I getting attacked once a year? Once a month? Like, give me a scale of the problem.
Every company is getting investigated on a daily basis. Every single one.
By
Big,
attack.
small, whatever. Yeah, yeah. Every single one, by attackers. Every single one. And those are, they've built, scanners to do reconnaissance across the entire world. And what they're looking for is that do the things that they see about you, and they're cataloging it. They've got databases for it. They sell some of that information in the dark web. And what they're doing is they're constantly evaluating the change that happens in your environment. And so one of the things like we do is we actually do that same recon, right? That they do. Because what you're looking for is, do the pieces fit, right? You know, I use a chessboard as an example, but you don't get into checkmate automatically, right? Like things have to happen and pieces have to keep moving. But once your pieces fit into a certain equation, your attacker can now do checkmate. And so, you could have 50 things that are happening at any point that an attacker is attacking. And then all of a sudden this one thing moves, right? And then, your CEO went on vacation and they tracked them down to the hotel they were at, and, you know, and stole their key card, right? Or whatever, or you have a port that just opened, or someone made a mistaken code. Once those pieces align, you have about 24 to 48 hours before an attacker is going to take you out.
Hmm. That's crazy. I would never have guessed, because you don't hear about these things happening really unless they're huge on the news. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And people don't disclose. Companies aren't disclosing these things, right? They're not releasing it out. On top of that, cyber providers have contracts with NDAs, and even in like big attacks like Target, like, that happened years and years ago. You never heard who the protectors of that company were, right? Like what cyber companies were there. So there is a bit of a of a disclosure issue. Now I get it, because, if you're in the middle of an attack, you don't want to disclose that it's happening, because what's also happened is the attackers that attacking you are looking for the news to see what you're talking about, to see how successful things you're doing are. Now, so you also want to, there needs to be some delay, but, by the time that you hear about some of these, it's on the ninth page, right? In the news. And so this happens way more than people know, and it's a daily occurrence, across thousands of companies, a day, around in the United States, even say even more than that. But it's not something that people know about. And I would say our society is very desensitized at this point to it. We hear a breach and we're like, okay, cool, another data breach, it happened again. And that's where I'm getting at, is like, we are not trained as a society to think of what the end game is going to be, right? And so when we hear a data breach at a hospital, right, or or a an IoT device, we don't put the pieces together, and we don't think of what is that attacker really after.
All right. So as a company, give us the top three things that an organization should be doing from a IT perspective to eh, protect themselves as much as they
Mm.
can from an attack like this. What are
Yeah.
the top three things?
So the first thing I tell people is, don't rely on your firewall at all as your detection technology. Firewalls get breached, or code issues all the time. Firewalls are just as vulnerable as any operating system, and they're the external part of your network. So you need to make sure that you have some way to collect data on the outside of that firewall in a passive way. It's really important that this is passive. And this goes for your cloud environments, goes
What
for
do you
your,
mean by that? Passive? What do you mean passive?
yeah. So if you look at like a firewall, for instance, it's an active prevention, right? It has an IP address. It's a wall. It's a door. Things can touch that IP address. They can scan it. They can evaluate it. Any operating system, even as much as you harden it, is going to have some flaws in it. It's going to have some way an attacker could eventually figure it out. And the only way to I would say, guarantee that the collection system you're using isn't compromised is to have it sitting in a place that doesn't have an IP address. Like, you can't attach to that device. And so there's multiple ways you can do that. You can use taps, you can use mirror ports, on the outside. But the first thing I would tell people is, if you talk to your IT and security staff and your first line of defense is your firewall, you should be very, very concerned, right? And you should find a way. There's a bunch of different ways to do it, but you just get in front of that firewall and you collect information there. Um, the other thing I would tell you is a lot of companies have based their data off of their data protection off of logs, and that is another thing I would tell people, is that if you are, you're focused on logs only, and those logs come from a firewall, or endpoints or servers, you can't trust those. And the reason for that is because those systems could be compromised. And in every incident I've ever worked on in my 30-year career, uh, every single time an attacker has manipulated logs. And so you have to have ways, like I was saying, sitting in front of a firewall, for instance, that you're getting information from areas of your environment that cannot be manipulated, right? And those are two really, really big things. And I would say those are the first two questions I would ask any cybersecurity company that I'm working with is, if I'm a business owner, how are you, what are you pulling from data from, and can those systems be potentially be compromised at all? And the third thing I would say is, work with an external cyber provider, even if you have your own SOC team. And the reason for that is that external SOC provider is going to see a lot of things happening globally that you're not going to see in your microcosm. It's the reason I went as a CISO, I reached out. We had tons of data, but early on in my career, I'm like, hey, I want to go reach out to my peers and see what they're seeing, because we all have to defend this information. How can we get information and share it together? And so the best way for organizations to do that is to work with an outside provider, even if they're not doing all your cyber, uh, and they're just a consultant that you reach out to every once in a while. Have that external provider that can provide some insight into what's happening outside your organization, so that way you can get more information before it actually comes and hits your door, right? You don't want to, I'll say, updates from antivirus and Intel updates on your firewalls. That's trending information. And like I said earlier, you don't want to be at the back end of a trend. You want to be on the front end of it.
Right. What about for people at home? How much of
Yeah.
this applies to like home networks and
Yeah.
home computers and stuff like that?
Yeah, I would say CISA came out about a couple months ago and said everybody reboot your home routers really, really quickly, right? And the reason they were doing that is because this attack group had actually infiltrated routers that people use for their homes, and had been sitting on them, and they were collecting information about individuals. Now they didn't know what houses, right? I mean, well, CISA did, because they can see that stuff, but like, they didn't want to broadcast, hey, you 3,000 homes, reboot your systems. They wanted to just tell everybody to do it. Now, rebooting your firewall did not fix the problem. It just cuts the external access off for a moment. Now the attacker can still come back, but rebooting it cuts them off. What they were hoping for is that people's routers had already downloaded the firmware, like new updates, and that by rebooting it, it would update it and then force, the closure of a vulnerability. And, not everyone has automatic updates on, but CISA was just trying to kill the blast radius. So what I would tell people at home is, don't wait for CISA to tell you things, right? Get familiar with your firewall.
I don't even know what CISA is.
So it's the United States, it's basically the governing body that does all of the security broadcasts. They do a lot of free security technology for companies now, and across the United States, it's replacing earlier systems that created like requirements and security requirements. Now, what but even with that, like, you don't even know what CISA is. CISA put this massive broadcast out. Not everyone got that broadcast, right? And so, it's so the thing I would tell people at home is, get familiar with your firewalls. Get familiar with the network equipment you have. It's really important that you do. Make sure you upgrade the firmware of them regularly. The second thing is most of these get installed by your ISPs with the default passwords. And as an attacker, I can scan the outside of your network. I can see exactly what model you have, or at least the manufacturer. And then I can go to the manufacturer's website and get the default username and password. So you want to make sure that you're upgrading your home equipment, you're resetting your passwords to something else that's more complex, at least better than default, and that you're restarting these things pretty frequently. And I would say at least once a month. If you do that, you will stop people from getting into your home network. The other thing is get a good antivirus software, and there's, pretty much anything on the market today, consumer wise, is going to protect you about the same. So just go find one and grab it. And the third is, I would say this is that, you as a target, you're generally, as an everyday person that's not a business, you work somewhere. And so, first thing is I would think about, am I a target to get into my company? If I am, I would reach out to your company and say, how do we reduce me being a target, right? How do we have better security here? And that especially goes for like CEOs, IT professionals, CFOs, anyone working in accounting. Uh, you know, People will attack there at your home. So, think about that. Um, and then the last thing I would say is, talk to your family about it too, because a lot of attacks are now coming through people's kids, getting into their homes, and then routing them back to their businesses. Now, from a personal protection standpoint, I would say that, your identity's more than likely been stolen already. One of the largest places identities get stolen. Can you guess? Can you guess
Uh,
where
you
they're
mean like
stolen the most?
countries or locations? What do you
Here in
mean?
the United States, yeah. What entities or businesses uh, are have the most identity stolen annually?
What entities? Like
Mhm.
which companies? Is that
Like
the
what business or company, or
oh,
can you guess?
healthcare. I don't know.
Healthcare. You would think, right? You would think healthcare would be it. Schools.
Oh,
They are the least protected, and they have the most new identities that haven't been stolen yet.
hmm,
And
smart,
yeah, right. And so, with your kids, with your families, you're not going to stop your identity from being stolen once you start getting credit cards and, all. I mean, that identity, but your data being stolen once you start working with businesses and things like that. They get hacked all the time. And so just know that your identity's out there. The thing you can do is freeze your credit. If you do that, that's a big step. No one's going to steal your credit cards. They're not going to create ones in your name. And then the second thing is I would get some type of identity theft protection. LifeLock is a great one. They've been around for a long time. You can now get it through your insurance provider. And I would get around $1 million in insurance coverage for it. It's not that expensive to do, but the key there is that's about how much it would cost you to regain your identity if it's stolen. But if you do those two things, you're generally going to be fine. If they're really after you because you're the CEO of a company, then you need to have a lot more protection than just those two things.
right? Wild. Well, hey, we're getting close to time, but I want to talk about the human trafficking thing.
But yeah,
That's a big part of your life and your story. What how'd you get involved in that? And yeah, give us some details.
yeah. So my wife and I, when we started Vigilant, we were praying about, what does this company need to be about, right? And we didn't want it just to be about making money. And that's not for us, that wasn't the the core of our legacy and the core of why we would want to pour into building business, because building business is really hard, and it sucks most of the time, and it's one of the hardest things I've ever done. And you have to have some intrinsic reason of why you're doing it. And one thing for Kate and I is, orphan care is really important, is really important to us, and the church that we were at the time as well. And so we decided that we'd take 25% of our profit and we would invest that into orphan care, as well as our time. And so we've been working, since the very first day we started, with organizations, like one we work with is called Back to Back, but we work all over the world, different locations. We've designed 3D prosthetics, 3D printed prosthetics before they were even a really big thing with Rochester Institute of Technology, in Hyderabad, India. We work in Nigeria, Mexico, the United States. And when you work in orphan care, what you find is that there's a lot of people that are pretty evil in orphan care as well. And so in some cases, they are funnels for human trafficking, and they're trying to just get kids to move into that world. And human trafficking isn't just sex trade. It could be work camps. It could be labor. It can be all kinds of things. And um, but the sex trade is a massive part of it, and that's where a lot of the revenue comes inside it. For those human trafficking organizations. And so as we started seeing that, we went, for me, yeah, I hate evil. I want to go after it. And so we started seeing that, and we went, well, that's pretty evil. Let's go after it. And so I became a human trafficking investigator a couple years ago. And we've been developing software for organizations out there to use for free to hunt down, people that are missing. And then my wife and I started this initiative called Forensic Fusion Initiative a couple years ago, right at the same time, where it's in Cincinnati now. We actually just increased it this year to allow remote locations to dial in, but we meet once a month. We're actually meeting tomorrow night, but we meet once a month, and we built this in connection with the FBI because we were reaching out to the FBI back then. Because we do a lot of work with them, and I said, well, "What do you guys do with human trafficking and missing exploited kids?" And he said, "We don't have a ton of resources, so we're doing the best we can, but we need more help." And so I said, well, what if we start this organization and we'll meet once a month? We'll train people to do open source intelligence, just hunting people, down on the internet, and we can put some casework towards it. And they said, great. So we started this thing, and we have about 40 people, 40, 50 people that come on a monthly basis. We've got 3 tracks. One track, we write software to give to organizations for free. A lot of the software we're writing, is they currently have to, if they go commercially, they have to pay $50,000 a seat for a year, and these organizations don't have the money for it. So we try to enable there. We have a group, one of the tracks in the group that they will look at, missing kids. So like in the state of Ohio, there's 17,000 kids go missing a year. And so we'll pick a couple kids off that on a monthly basis and see if we can find them on the internet and connect them to law enforcement. We've been able to do that multiple times. And then the third track is a gaming track where the team just gets online, like applications like Roblox and different other Call of Duty, things like that, and just gets on there and sees if anyone comes along and tries to start a relationship or try to coax us into some other place, and then we take that information and we give that to the FBI as intelligence. So
Right.
it's
Wow.
been pretty crazy. But the deeper you get into this industry, or like not the industry, but fighting the industry of human trafficking, it's darker and darker and darker. It's a pretty crazy thing,
That is
darker
pretty.
than you'd ever imagine. Yeah,
Yikes. Well, Chris, it's been a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on. I've certainly learned a lot, and
great. It was fun.
I'm gonna need to go like wash my brain out.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well,
Well,
hey, like I
thank you
said,
so
thanks
much.
for coming on. It's been really great.
My pleasure. Thanks, Greg.
All right. Awesome. Yeah.